Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Always exciting to be back.
We get some pretty interesting stuff sent our way, but today's sources are especially cool, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we got this pair of postage stamps from 1970s Indonesia, and you wouldn't believe what they reveal.
Okay, you've got me intrigued. What could be so revealing about a couple of old stamps?
Well, on the surface, they're just these colorful little squares, right? But when you look closer, we're talking about a public health crisis, like a full-blown national disaster.
Whoa, hold on. A national disaster?
From some stamps.
Yep. Blindness. A national disaster of blindness, according to these sources.
That's heavy stuff. So these stamps were part of some kind of public awareness campaign, I'm guessing?
Exactly. But before we get to the stamps themselves, let's back up a bit.
Yeah, good idea. What was the situation in Indonesia at the time?
Well, according to the source material, the Indonesian Ministry of Health declared blindness a national disaster back in 1967. That's almost a decade before these stamps were even issued. 1967, wow. That really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? Blindness must have been a widespread problem for them to make that kind of declaration.
Absolutely. And you can see that sense of urgency reflected in these stamps. We've got two denominations, a 20 rupiah and a 40 rupiah.
Okay. And what do they look like?
Well, the 20 rupiah one has this eye, a fish, and some green leaves. Kind of symbolic, like a healthy eye.
Interesting. What about the 40 rupiah stamp?
That one's a bit more direct, maybe even stark. It depicts a blind man with glasses and a walking stick.
Yeah, I can see how that would grab your attention. But I'm guessing the imagery was just part of the message, right? There must have been some text or a slogan to go with it.
Oh, absolutely. Both stamps are part of a series called Foresight Prevents Blindness. Pretty clear what they were going for there, right?
Totally. It's like a call to action, almost. Pay attention to your eye health, folks.
Exactly. So we've got this crisis, a national disaster blindness, and now we see the government trying to address it with this campaign. What can you tell us about the campaign itself?
Well, based on what we have here, it seems like they went for a multi-pronged approach. The source material uses the phrase preventative, promotive, and curative efforts.
So hitting it from all angles.
Exactly. You have to prevent new cases from developing, promote good eye health practices, and of course, treat the existing conditions. Makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me too. But they were dealing with some pretty serious culprits, right? The text mentions trachoma, glaucoma, xerophthalmia, and cataracts. Some of those might be a bit unfamiliar to folks. Can you break those down a bit?
Sure. Let's start with trachoma. It's a bacterial infection, actually, and it was a huge problem back then, especially in communities with limited access to clean water and sanitation.
Ah, so poverty and hygiene playing a role.
Sadly, yes. Repeated infections can actually scar the inner eyelid, causing the eyelashes to turn inward.
Ouch. That sounds painful.
It is. And then the eyelashes start scratching the cornea, leading to even more problems. Left untreated, it can cause blindness.
That's awful. What about the others? Glaucoma, xerophthalmia, cataracts. Those sound pretty scary too.
They can be, yeah. Glaucoma involves a buildup of pressure inside the eye, damaging the optic nerve. Xerophthalmia is basically severe dry eye, often caused by vitamin A deficiency. And cataracts are a clouding of the lens of the eye.
So a whole range of causes and potential problems. It's no wonder they were sounding the alarm.
Right. It wasn't just a matter of individual cases, but a real threat to the health and productivity of the nation.
Exactly. So they were tackling these different eye diseases, raising awareness through these stamps. What kind of impact did all of this have? 1 million stamps of each denomination is a lot, even back in 1976.
It's hard to say exactly what the impact was, measuring something like that.
Yeah, it's not like they could track how many people saw a stamp and then went to get their eyes checked.
Right, but think about the context. This was long before the internet, social media, none of that. Postage stamps were everywhere. People used them every day for letters, bills, all sorts of things.
Ah, so they had a much wider reach back then.
Absolutely. Those stamps traveled far and wide, carrying those messages about eye health into every corner of Indonesia. You could say they reached a massive audience.
Like tiny little billboards spreading the word. It's pretty clever when you think about it.
Yeah, very effective for the time.
And, we also learned that the designer of these stamps, Mr. Massino Emsling, worked for the Ministry of Health. That suggests a real commitment to getting this message out there.
Definitely. This wasn't just some random assignment. It was a deliberate effort to raise awareness.
I wonder what other strategies they were using alongside these stamps. Do we have any information on that?
Unfortunately, not from what you've sent over. But it's a great question. It makes you wonder, right? Were they doing radio ads? Putting up posters? Maybe even going into schools to talk about eye health?
I bet they were doing all sorts of things.
Probably. And it's also interesting to think about the global context. The 1970s saw this growing focus on preventable diseases, with initiatives targeting everything from polio to malaria.
Oh, like a worldwide push for public health.
Exactly. So perhaps Indonesia drew inspiration from some of those international efforts, sharing ideas, best practices, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. Learning from and collaborating with other countries facing similar challenges. Now, this campaign was clearly a big deal, but did it work? Did Indonesia manage to overcome this national disaster of blindness?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, these sources don't give us any specific data on the long-term outcomes.
Ah, that's too bad. I'd love to know if they saw a real improvement in eye health across the country.
Me too. But even without those specific numbers, I think we can still appreciate what they were trying to do. They recognized a serious health crisis and took a proactive, multifaceted approach to address it. And that, in itself, is worth recognizing, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's inspiring, even. It makes you think about the health challenges that we face today, both individually and as a society.
Right. Like, what can we learn from the past? What creative solutions are being explored right now to tackle the health problems of our time?
Good food for thought. I bet our listeners have some ideas.
I'm sure they do.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. These stamps might seem like small, insignificant relics from the past, but as we've seen, they actually hold a powerful message about public health and the importance of taking action. Thanks for joining us on this journey to 1970s Indonesia. We'll see you next time for another fascinating deep dive.
See you then.